afternoon. I'm Professor Geraldine Doyle, Director of the UCD Smurfit School and Associate Dean of the UCD College of Business. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to our 8th annual Laurence Crowley Lecture. This lecture series is named in honour of our founding Executive Chairman of the UCD Smurfit School, Dr. Laurence Crowley. It was with deep sadness that the UCD community marked the passing of Dr. Crowley this time last year, December 2020. Laurence played an instrumental role in the foundation of both the UCD Smurfit and the UCD Loughlin Quinn Schools of Business, and was a close friend and highly valued advisor of the UCD Smurfit School. He was an inspiring member of the UCD community, as well as the Irish and international business community. Appointed as our first chairman in 1990, his leadership, commercial awareness, and unwavering belief in the power of teams laid the foundation for the UCD Smurfit School to receive global recognition as Ireland's leading business school. Laurence's innovative leadership and considerable business acumen led to his appointment to many directorship positions with leading organisations, including Elan Pharmaceuticals, which supported the Laurence Crowley Lecture Series for many years. Laurence remained an active member of the school's advisory board until his passing. His sustained support through initiatives such as this annual Laurence Crowley Lecture Series offered students and alumni new ways to engage with leaders in the international world of business. We are pleased to continue this event in Laurence's name and see it as a fitting tribute to his legacy. Whilst we are not on campus today, I do want to share with you an important milestone. 30 years ago, in 1991, UCD Michael Smurfit Graduate Business School opened its doors for the first time to welcome students to Ireland's first campus solely dedicated to graduate business education. We will be marking our year-long anniversary with a series of events, and this year's lecture is one of many that we will digitise and share as an important legacy of 30 years of business education. Now to the reason we are here today. We are delighted to welcome our guest, Emer Cooke, Executive Director of the European Medicines Agency, who joins us from the headquarters in Amsterdam for a very topical and important conversation. Emer, we are so pleased to have you with us today, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to have this important conversation at this critical time. I would also like to acknowledge my colleague, Jan Rosier, Elan Professor of Business of Technology, of Biotechnology, who has spearheaded the Laurence Crowley Lecture Series since its launch. So it's my pleasure now to hand over to you, Jan.
Thank you, Geraldine, for that warm tribute to Dr. Crowley. Today's topic for my conversation with Emer Cooke is COVID-19 vaccines and medicines research and regulation. We will take questions at the end of the interview, so please submit questions through the Q&A facility. An Irish national, Emer Cooke has over 30 years of experience in international regulatory affairs in different leadership roles. Before taking up her current role, she was a director responsible for all medical product-related regulatory activities at the World Health Organization in Geneva between November 2016 and November 2020. Emer Cooke worked at EMA between 2002 and 2016. She joined the agency as head of inspections and became head of international affairs in 2009. Prior to that, she was principal administrator in the pharmaceuticals unit of the European Commission between 1998 and 2002, with responsibility for inspections, international activities, including enlargement of the EU and selected legislative initiatives. Emer holds a degree in pharmacy and 2 master's degrees in science and an MBA from Trinity College, Dublin. During this pandemic, the European Medicines Agency and its scientific and administrative personnel have not only played a vital role in the development of treatments, but have also shown excellence in the timely evaluation of COVID vaccines and treatments. Given the scale and the continued impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the unprecedented mobilization of the pharmaceutical industry's resources, the crucial role and great responsibility of the regulatory authorities have been brought to the fore. The urgent need for new vaccines and medicines and the short time frame for their development have put unparalleled pressure on regulatory authorities. It has clearly shown that the risk of drug development is also carried by the authorities who need to decide whether a new vaccine and/or drug should be placed on the market. This pandemic did not allow for regulatory error, neither through the approval of treatments that should not have been introduced into our communities, nor by disapproving those that should have been. It reminds us about the key role that regulatory authorities play in the process of new vaccine and drug development for the benefit of citizens and patients. To discuss all of this, I therefore warmly welcome our guest of honor, Ms. Emer Cooke, Executive Director of the European Medicines Agency. Emer, welcome to this webinar. As a first question that I assume is on everybody's mind today, what does it mean to be the head of the European Medicines Agency in these turbulent times?
So thank you very much, Geraldine and Jan. And before I start to answer this very challenging question, I just wanted to pass my own tribute to Laurence Crowley and to say what an honor it is to be selected to give this, to have this conversation today. And it's really an important time for us all. And I have to say, for me personally, becoming executive director of the EMA was always going to be a challenging move, but little did I think when I actually applied in July 2019 that I would be coming to this role in the middle of what is arguably the biggest crisis, the public health crisis that certainly I've seen in my lifetime, and I hope it will be the biggest one that I've seen in my lifetime. So I've been in the position now for 13 months, and it's been dynamic. It's been stressful, but it's been incredibly motivational because I took on the position just as the first interim clinical trials came out on the mRNA vaccines. And suddenly the spotlight was on us. Suddenly everybody wanted to know what was, were we going to approve them, how we were going to approve them, what were we going to do? And this had two perspectives. One, first of all, it was fantastic that we were suddenly seeing very, very good results, because I had been working the previous 6 months, I'd been working on preparing for vaccine authorization while at WHO, but we had actually been worried that the vaccine effectiveness rates could be under 50%, and then what would we do? And so when the rates came out over 90%, it was a remarkable achievement for the companies, but then also a great challenge for us to see were these really were these results supported? Did the studies support it? Had they done everything according to the regular standards? And we had to adapt all our procedures and approaches to deal with the challenges of getting to grips with these two, at the time it was two messenger RNA vaccines. We've gone on to authorize 2 additional viral vector vaccines. But again, a very new technology, and all this while we're all managing to work remotely. We're a business or an organization not used to being in the spotlight, and suddenly the world is looking at us. So it was a time of huge solidarity, working around the clock, challenging existing practices, so that we went from monthly committee meetings to daily interactions. We had people doing rotas so that they would be able to assist the companies and the experts in doing the evaluations. And I was really I really found a great sense of solidarity and motivation, feeling that what we were doing really mattered and could make a real difference. and a huge responsibility, because authorizing any medicinal product is a huge responsibility, but authorizing vaccines in the context of a pandemic, or you really want to get it right.
Okay, thank you, Emer. Now, only 2 weeks ago, you have updated members of the Environment, the Public Health and Food Safety Committee in the European Parliament on the situation around COVID-19 vaccines, including reviews, authorizations for pediatric use and boosters, as well as recent developments in COVID-19 therapeutics and the general epidemiological situation in the EU. I have 2 questions. First of all, can you shed some light on these developments first? And second, now that the new variant, the Omicron variant, is on everyone's mind, what does this variant mean for the vaccines approved in the EU?
So thank you very much, Jan. And yeah, let me just give you a brief overview of what I presented to the ENVI committee 2 weeks ago. And of course, there's new developments all the time. So even 2 weeks old news is already out of date. And of course, the new variant is really dominating the headlines at the moment. But let's just let me just tell you that we have 4 authorized vaccines. So since March of last year, and we've got 5 more under different stages of review, and we expect probably next week to be able to authorize the 5th vaccine. Now, all of these vaccines were initially authorized for adults over 18 years of age, and then progressively for the Comirnaty and the Moderna vaccine, the 2 mRNA vaccines, we have started to review data for younger age groups. So, for example, for Comirnaty, we have now approved it for 5 to 11-year-olds. And for Moderna, we have approved it for adolescents. Now, all this work, these additional approvals mean that we're reviewing new packages of information. Usually when you start the review of any medicine, you start with the trials that were done on adults over 18, and then you progressively, once you see the success in that area, you move down to the younger age groups. With vaccines, we've also approved boosters. We have booster doses now approved for adults over 18 for both Comirnaty and Moderna. We also approved a 3rd dose for immunosuppressed individuals with both the mRNA vaccines. In addition, we've been looking at therapeutics. I think we now have authorized 4 therapeutics, remdesivir last year, and then this year some monoclonal antibodies, and we're also looking at some oral antivirals, which could make a big difference because they would be easier to use in clinical practice. So we've had, since our initial work on the vaccines, we continue to do a lot of what we call post-authorization activity to make sure that we look at any new data that's coming out. We also look at increasing the manufacturing capacity, new formulations, shelf life extensions. These have all allowed us now to move to a situation where we have just under 900 million vaccines administered in the EU, and we've exported more than 1.2 billion doses outside the EU. So we've come a long way since the first vaccine authorizations. But let me just talk a little bit about the Omicron, because this is really dominating the news at the moment. Everybody's very worried about it. And I just wanted to say that from the regulatory perspective, it's really too early for us to understand what the regulatory implications will be, because we need to know more about the virus neutralization studies, the transmissibility, what the effect on severe hospitalization and deaths are. So the message continues to be, please do get vaccinated, please do get boosted if booster doses available, and please don't forget the non-pharmaceutical interventions. But rest assured that we are liaising on a daily basis with the companies responsible for the vaccine development. We put we put guidance in place because we know that viruses mutate. So we had already got a series of studies outlined that we asked companies to do in the event of a change, a need for a change in the virus strain, but we're not at that stage yet.
Okay, thank you, Emer. When I talk to students or family members and we discuss the vaccines which have been put on the market, some of them have a bit of a concern because these regulatory dossiers were approved in record time. Okay? So what do you say to people who are concerned about how fast these new vaccines are being pushed through? And equally important, can you share with us how EMA will conduct long-term follow-up of these vaccine safety and effectiveness, which is another concern for some people? Yeah,
so no, thank you very much. And this is something that I really do like to try and explain, because I think there are two main factors. If you think about why we were able to approve these vaccines in record time, it was one, that there was unprecedented collaboration across all stakeholders. There was really a willingness and a desire to make sure that we did everything as effectively as possible. So we were looking at where we could, were there any administrative steps that we didn't need to take? Could we collaborate more with international regulators? Could we get data packages early? So for example, in Europe, we usually wait until the full data package is available and then we start the review. But we started as soon as a package of non-clinical data would become available. We gave that to our experts, then we gave the next package, then we gave the next package. So it meant we weren't faced with a huge package at the end. And only when we could see that the data was leading to a conclusion that it did meet the quality, safety and efficacy standards, were we ready to finalize the application. So we had the unprecedented collaboration, but we also had very big data sets. And I think people forget that. We had over 30,000 people in the clinical trials. Now that is unprecedented for vaccines. So it meant that before we even started, we had a huge data set. And now I've just told you the numbers of doses that have been distributed across the world. We have a huge database on which to base our safety and effectiveness evaluation. And just to come back to the type of studies that we require at time of approval. So we, in Europe, the type of regulatory tool that we use is a conditional marketing authorization. And this puts legal conditions on the companies to provide additional information on studies as they complete them. So we have put a number of obligations on long-term safety follow-up, on effectiveness studies, on studies in pediatric patients, on studies in pregnant women, and these are all activities that the companies have to follow. But in addition, we have a pharmacovigilance plan. So at the time of authorization, we've already looked at the initial safety information that we see from the clinical trials. We've looked at what we call the adverse events of special interest. We've tried to identify what the baseline numbers are, and then we look at the baseline versus the emerging data that's coming from the use in the fields, and we put all this into our database, and then we're able to establish whether there's any new rare event coming up that might cause a particular concern. But in addition to the requirements for companies to submit all the adverse events, for risk minimization plans that we ask the companies to do as well. We review every month, we review the data on rollout, all the adverse events, but we also have commissioned and funded several observational studies on different aspects of looking at different aspects of safety and effectiveness. For example, we're looking at the long-term impact of myocarditis. We're looking at studies in pregnancy. And these are studies that we're funding across the European member states, where we're looking at the real world effectiveness of the vaccines in sites that are contracted to do this for us.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Emer. Now, this is all very reassuring for people and individuals who are knowledgeable about vaccines and drug treatments. But there is still a group of people in society that remain very critical, okay? And although most of us understand the approach that you have explained, how drugs are being approved and how the follow-up is taking place, is there a way in which EMA can also build trust among the population and work against conspiracy theories and anti-vaccine activists, and become, let's say, the definitive and reliable source of information on vaccines?
So we really take our job as a source of reliable information very, very seriously. And we've had to massively increase our communication activities for two main reasons. One, the additional interest that has been generated in the medicines approval process in general, but two, because of the huge increase in misinformation and disinformation. And this is not something that we really had to deal with before. So we're sort of learning on the job here, but it's not just us who's learning. We're working with WHO, we're working with the European Commission. We have communication experts in each of the member states, and we work together with them to see how best to respond to some of the fake news or misinformation that is circulating. So we've had to we've increased our communication measures in a number of ways, but one of the areas which we hadn't done before was to engage really with social media. We've set up social listening platforms. We've had public stakeholder events where anybody can join. I think we had 3,500 at our first stakeholder event. We've now moved on to bi-weekly press briefings where we update on effectively a day-to-day basis on what we're doing. And we've also introduced a fact-checking service. So if journalists or individuals have questions that they want us to verify, we will check the facts based on what we've got. Now, I have to say that communicating in the current environment in Europe, which is made up of 27 member states with different cultures, practices, different perspectives of government and state, different perspectives of towards vaccines. It's very hard to have a one-size-fits-all message. So we also need to work with the healthcare professionals. We work with the healthcare professional societies, but we also need to work and increase our activities in different languages and reach out to particularly to where there are challenges with vaccine uptake. We've been working with the professional organizations there to see whether we can help in any way.
Okay, thank you, Emer. Let's discuss international collaboration for a moment. In my student groups, I have quite a number of students coming from Africa, from India, and we know that the EMA is collaborating extensively, for example, with the United States Food and Drug Administration and with other regulatory authorities. Well, therefore, two questions. How do you see the future of international collaboration between regulators? But also as important, and that is the reason why I was referring to my African Indian students, how do you, for example, can you elaborate about the interaction of EMA and regulatory authorities in Africa and other countries in development?
Well, I have to say that I am absolutely passionate about international collaboration. And when I moved to Brussels almost 30 years ago, I started to work on ICH, which was at the time the International Conference on Harmonization, and it's now the International Council of Harmonization. It was a fascinating experience just to learn how different regulators did things, how everybody thought they were doing the right thing, but that there was scope to work together and harmonize. So at the time, it was really focused on EU, US FDA and Japan, but in the meantime, ICH now has 10 additional member countries and 6 regulatory networks, including from Asia, Middle East and Africa. This is, we do a huge amount of work, both at a bilateral and multilateral level from the perspective of the European Medicines Agency. Let me also give you the example of the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities. This is a coalition of heads of medicines authorities across the world that I chair. We've really tried to bring the international community together during COVID, so we would be much more streamlined, working together, trying to make sure that we didn't have discordant approaches that would lead to delays for any population. We have in EMA, we actually have invited regulators from outside the EU to actually join our scientific committee assessment process, so that they could benefit from the discussions that were going on in our committees. And this includes WHO, who participates and then collaborates with a lot of countries then obviously outside the EU, and particularly in low and middle income countries. Now, when I was working in WHO, we worked, and this is, I'm talking with my my ex-WHO hat on now for a moment. We worked with the European Medicines Agency on an Ebola vaccine, which of course it was being authorized effectively as a traveler's vaccine in Europe, but was much needed for the outbreak of Ebola in Africa. And what we did was we, after the initial scientific review had been done at a European level, we organized a meeting in Rwanda, and we invited 13 African countries to join that. And these were the countries which were highest risk, had highest risk of Ebola. And we explained the conclusions so far. We both from the assessment side and also from the safety side. We invited questions. We asked for a commitment that on the basis of these discussions that there would be an acceleration of approval in the countries involved. And in fact, when we did get to approve that vaccine at the end of 2019, it was pre-qualified by WHO within 48 hours, and then led to 6 or 7 regulatory approvals in the African countries most affected. So this actually stimulated some of the work we did in COVID as well. And in fact, for one of the COVID vaccines, there was an emergency use listing by WHO within 2 weeks, which then led to an approval or import authorization in over 101 countries within 2 weeks of the emergency use listing. So that's sort of what we've been doing on, that's some of the practical stuff that we have been doing, but we're also working very closely with the African Union where there are plans for an African medicines agency, and of course they're looking to the EMA to see if there are any lessons that they can learn from how we've done things. We've hosted a number of meetings of regulators here. Of course, now in the last couple of years, these have been online, which has also been a good thing because it meant we could do more. We continue to work closely with our with all our regulatory partners. India, for example, is on the ICMRA committee. I think South Africa, Ghana, and Nigeria are also on ICMRA. So we have a lot of contacts with regulators, both in developed countries and in less developed countries.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you, Emer. On another note, it's clear that the impact of drug regulation and the role of regulatory authorities cannot and should not be underestimated. It is a crucial role. Okay? Now, when I ask students how they reflect upon their future career, most, if not all, are inclined to join the industry. And it comes as a surprise when I tell them there is an interesting international and important role for them as scientists in the field of drug regulation and public health protection. And I think in a way you are a role model how scientists can serve the public through an international career in regulatory affairs, given your work in the World Health Organization and currently as head of EMA. And therefore I have 3 questions. First question is, are regulatory authorities in the field of drug regulation not struggling with an image problem, given the inclination of students to rather join the industry than public health authorities? That's the first question. And my second question, would it not be good to educate the public, especially the younger people, about the crucial and interesting role as civil servants in that field? And what would be your advice to students?
So very, very interesting, and it's yeah, it's interesting to learn that we have an image problem. I would have thought we have no image. It's more a lack of awareness. I think maybe the COVID-19 pandemic has actually highlighted the job of regulator, and it's done more than any education campaign ever could. Yeah. I have to say that before I took over at EMA, and I worked for 14 years before I became executive director. Honestly, even many of my fellow pharmacists didn't really know what EMA was or what it did. And now my first week in Netherlands, I had a drive with an Uber driver who had an in-depth knowledge of vaccine regulation. So I think things have changed quite dramatically. Back when I was doing pharmacy, I had a half-day session on regulatory affairs as part of my curriculum. Now, I know that has changed a lot in the meantime, but I would say there's still a bit of work to do. I certainly had no idea of what the possibilities were. I think now there are huge possibilities that didn't really exist when I was going through the initial phases of my career. And there are opportunities that you almost need to know. It's not immediately obvious. You need to have exposure and to understand the environment a bit. But on the other hand, we've also got courses in government affairs and policy that we didn't really have as scientists, certainly when I was going through. So what I would say is, if you do think, first of all, I would say there are many opportunities open to scientists internationally if you want to work in a policy related or a public health area. And ways of getting exposure to that environment or can be through some of the policy international affairs offerings. We have a traineeship program here at EMA. We get something like 600 applicants every year. Great source of future leaders, but who for some reason, have been exposed to the idea of EMA and have applied for the different traineeships. WHO has a traineeship program as well. So I think a lot of it is about understanding the environment. For me, it was almost by accident, to be honest. It was wanting to combine my experience as a pharmacist, as a scientist, with an interest in international collaboration, which brought me to Brussels 30 years ago. And from there, you get in touch, you're exposed to different groups, organizations, patient groups. Brussels is a huge source of different institutions that more and more have places for scientists, particularly with a science and policy element.
Okay, all right. One more question from my side, and then I'm going to see whether the public has any, or the audience has any other questions. A question that I have with respect, you already referred to the fact that because of the pandemic, you had to reorganize the internal processes and procedures in order to be able to tackle such a need for new vaccines and therapies in view of the pandemic. Now, how do you think that all this has changed let's say, the way drugs may be approved in the future? Okay, how about the regulatory responsibilities about what did you learn in order to tackle new incoming drugs and approval procedures? Any idea?
So, of course, we're conducting a lessons learned exercise on the experience that we've had and we continue to have during the current crisis. One thing I forgot to mention at the beginning was the fact that we had a health threats plan that we could introduce as soon as we realized that this was a public health threat, meant that we were a lot readier than we would have been before. Okay. And that built from the 2009 pandemic, where we had the H1N1 pandemic back in 2009. Now, we are the two areas that we're focusing on as immediate concerns or looking at the how we manage resources and sustainability, because it's one thing to work around the clock for 3 months of the year, but when this becomes an expectation for the rest of for the rest of your professional life, it puts a little bit of a strain on those working in the area. So we've had to look at how we could increase sustainability of resourcing. We're looking at things like, could we, because it's not just a case of having more staff, it's having the appropriately trained staff. Is there a way of increasing our access to infectious disease expertise when it's needed in such a pandemic? The other area that we're looking at is the whole area of communication, because I think what's come out very clearly is you cannot work in isolation as a regulator. We have to work with the epidemiologists. We have to work with the public health authorities. We have to increase. We have to work with patient organizations. We have to work with healthcare professionals. So we have to increase our communication and messaging, so that we're much more aware of what we're doing, what the timelines are, what the effect of what we might say might have on some of the other institutions. So these are areas that we're now trying to concretize in terms of bringing new learnings forward. I think we will continue with the idea that for certain priority products, we'll be able to do some type of rolling reviews and accelerated assessment, but certainly not for everything.
Okay, all right, okay. Let's look to some of the questions raised by the public, okay? And I see some of these questions in a way have already been answered, but let me select one, okay? I think it's from one, it's from a student, okay? And it says, could Emer run through her route to her current job and her previous education, advice to anyone wishing to pursue a career in regulatory affairs? It's linked to one of our previous questions, but this is a more direct question in a way.
Yeah, well, I have to say I had a very complicated route to my current career. I started out as a pharmacist, and I worked in various areas as a community pharmacist, a regulatory affairs pharmacist. I actually worked in setting up a small R&D facility in Dublin in the very early days, as well as working for the Irish regulator. And then I really hadn't found, I still hadn't found what I was looking for. And I decided that that it would be good for me to take some time out. And I did a full-time study I did an MBA in Trinity. And I realized two things there. One, that pharmacy can hold its own as a degree with any other degree. And two, that that actually I was interested in working on new regulatory developments. And that really was what took me to Brussels in 1992. Mm-hmm. And from there, I worked for the European Pharmaceutical Association. I then, that brought me into contact with the European Commission. I was offered a short-term position there. I moved to London to the MA effectively for family reasons. We were, my husband and I were both traveling an awful lot. Our children were small. We felt we needed to have a base where we wouldn't be traveling quite as much. And the opportunity of the head of inspections job came up in EMA, and I have to say that I really loved working in this environment. I think you have to be, if you're interested in pursuing a non-standard career path, I think you have to be open to every opportunity. I've lived and worked in 6 European countries, moved my family mostly. these are not, you require a supportive background and family to be able to do this. So I think you have to find what you love. I'm a firm believer that you have to work at something that about which you're passionate, because you spend so much time doing this. It has to be something that you feel makes a difference to you. Yeah. So I would say follow your heart.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Emer. I think this is this was one of the questions from, I assume, a student. So thank you for your insight. Another question now from a colleague. And I'm going to read a question from the Q&A, okay? It reads, I know the EMA don't get directly involved in health economic decision-making, but I'm curious to hear about Emer's opinion on health inequality. And he or she refers to, particularly in relation to COVID vaccines and variants, are we not destined to continue this cycle of new variants emerging until we have a high global vaccination rate? Any ideas on that topic?
Well, so, I mean, our responsibility is the approval of vaccines for Europe. But of course, with my background in WHO, I am firmly committed to global access, and the way that we can contribute most positively to that at the moment is through making sure that we can increase the manufacturing capacity, because we need global supply if we're going to have global access. So the tangible things that we can do are really about making sure that there is enough manufacturing capacity, so that there will be global supply. I do think this is something that the world needs to continue to look at, because we do need we need global access if we're going to solve this as a global problem. So it's about also raising attention, working with the commitments that the EU has made to vaccine equity, and also looking at how we can, and this is probably in the longer term, how we can look at encouraging increasing manufacture in countries where they could have this could help enable sustainable local supply.
Okay. One more question. It's a rather, I guess it must be maybe a difficult question, but I'm going to ask maybe as last question. The question is, can you tell us the happiest and saddest day since the start of the pandemic as the head of EMA?
Well, that's a very difficult question.
I can imagine, yeah.
I can tell you the saddest day. One of our staff passed away from a heart attack, and he was in his early 50s, and it came as a huge shock to us all. And EMA it's still a relatively young organization. Now I'm definitely one of the geriatrics, but we have a very young population, and this just brought home the fragility of life, and that was definitely one of the saddest days. And I know it's not about the pandemic, but I have to say it affected us all very, very, very much. And the happiest, I think it was the first vaccine approval in December last year. I think we had many false starts, and we weren't sure we'd actually make it. And after all the work that had been put into this by all our experts across Europe, being confident that we had we were in a position to approve this vaccine was really a very, very positive day. And really kudos to the experts, kudos to the rapporteurs, and kudos to all my staff who helped to make this happen.
Okay, thank you very much, Emer. I think we have covered not all the questions, but most questions within this limited time frame. And Emer, we would like to thank you sincerely for this fascinating insight into how EMA successfully converts years of scientific research and knowledge into vital protection for the lives of everyone on the planet. And therefore, for all our sakes, Emer, we wish you and your collaborators at EMA every success. And thank you also for those who are attendees for joining today. And with that, I would like to close this webinar. Thank you again, Emer.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.